Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today,
Honestly, today we are going to some dark places, but I think they're necessary
it's
places.
good to be here. And yes, dark is probably the right word. We are looking at a topic that I think a lot of people feel in their gut, that sense of unease,
Yeah.
when they scroll the news, but maybe they don't have the specific vocabulary for it.
Exactly. Usually we look at sources that explain a specific historical event or maybe a breakthrough in tech, but the stack of papers you brought today, it feels different. It feels like we are looking at an x-ray of a bone that is, well, that's currently fracturing.
That's a very apt analogy.
Hmm.
The source material we are diving into today is essentially an autopsy of a living system.
Yeah.
We are looking at the U.S. government, but not this Schoolhouse Rock version.
Right.
We aren't talking about how a bill becomes a law in that happy, idealistic sense. We are talking about power, raw kinetic power.
And the stakes, well, the source doesn't pull any punches. I was reading through the intro of the source material, and it literally drops the phrase, Second American Civil War. It does, and it's startling to see it written out so starkly in the analysis. It's not couched in academic language, it's just there.
Right. The text says, almost casually, it would be cool, and maybe we even get a second American Civil War. Now, obviously, the tone there is deeply sarcastic. It's biting. But the observation underneath it is deadly serious.
Of course.
It's describing a reality where extreme polarization isn't just about people unfriending each other on Facebook or arguing at Thanksgiving dinner. It's about a system where violence has become an integral part of political life.
And that is the hook. That is why we are here. The source argues that the American totem, this shared identity, this idea that we are all in this together, is fracturing.
That totem, yeah.
And when that totem fractures, when that belief evaporates, the mechanisms of government stop working as designed and start working as weapons.
So our mission today is to unpack that, to look at this constitutional struggle. And I want to be really clear for you listening right off the bat. This isn't a red team versus blue team episode. This isn't us bashing one side to prop up the other.
No, absolutely not. That would miss the point entirely. The source is very specific about that.
This is about the executive branch versus the legislative branch. It's about the president versus Congress. It's a structural battle that, it transcends whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office at this exact moment.
That is the key distinction. We are analyzing the machinery. We want to understand what happens when the system enters gridlock. How is power wielded when the laws can't be passed?
And we're going to get specific.
Very specific. We are going to look at federal agencies turning into personal enforcement squads. We are going to look at bypassing the power of the purse, which is, the most fundamental power Congress has.
We're also going to look at the legal theories used to just ignore oversight.
Exactly. So if you are a learner who wants to understand how the U.S. government actually works when the gloves come off, when the safety rails start to creak.
This is the deep dive for you.
Mm-hmm.
So grab a coffee or maybe something stronger, and let's get into Section 1, the rise of the imperial presidency.
The imperial presidency. It sounds majestic, doesn't it? Like something out of a history book about Rome.
It sounds like Star Wars to me. I keep expecting a theme song every time you say it.
It does have that vibe, but it's actually a very serious political science term popularized by the historian Arthur Schlesinger. The source uses this concept to frame everything we are seeing today.
So let's define it for everyone. What does imperial presidency actually mean in this context? Because I think we hear imperial and just think powerful. But it's more specific than that, isn't it?
It is much more specific. Think about how the U.S. system is supposed to work. You have three branches: executive, legislative, judicial, decision. And they were supposed to be co-equal.
Checks and balances.
Checks and balances. Rock, paper, scissors. But the concept of the imperial presidency describes a historical shift where the president, the executive, starts to become the dominant force. It's a shift from administering the law to ruling by decree.
Ruling by decree. That sounds like a king. It sounds fundamentally un-American, actually.
Yeah. In a structural sense, yes. It's when a leader takes a temporary election victory, a temporary majority, and tries to transform that into absolute power. They start trying to persuade Congress to pass laws and start trying to bypass the legislature entirely to get what they want.
So it's the executive branch essentially eating the legislative branch.
That's a great way to put it. It absorbs the powers that were explicitly given to the other branch.
Now, here is where we need to do that neutrality check I mentioned, because I think it's very easy to hear imperial presidency and immediately picture one specific person, probably Donald Trump, given, all the recent news cycles.
Of course.
But the source is very, very careful to point out that this is a bipartisan problem.
That is a crucial point. If we just make this about Trump, we miss the structural rot. We miss the forest for the trees. The source explicitly cites Joe Biden to prove this point right at the top.
So walk us through those Biden examples provided in the text. What are they?
Okay, so the source highlights the cancellation of student debt. Now, I want to pause here. Put aside whether you think canceling student debt is a good idea or a bad idea economically.
Right, the policy itself doesn't matter for this discussion.
Exactly. Put aside your personal feelings on tuition. Look at the mechanism.
We are looking at the gears, not the outcome.
Precisely. The source describes Biden using executive power to eliminate that debt as unconstitutional. Why? Because under the U.S. Constitution, Congress holds the purse strings. Article 1 is very clear. Congress decides where money goes.
They authorize the spend
They
then.
authorize spending, they collect taxes, they manage the debt. Spending that kind of money, or in this case, forgiving that kind of debt owed to the Treasury, is traditionally and constitutionally a legislative power.
So by doing it through an executive action.
He is effectively bypassing Congress. He is saying, I don't need the legislature's permission to fundamentally change the financial reality of millions of people. He's just doing it.
And it wasn't just money. The source mentions war, too, which feels even more significant.
Yes, and this is arguably even more serious. The source points out that Biden conducted military attacks in Syria and Yemen without congressional approval.
I remember that being in the news, but it sort of came and went.
It always does. But think about what the Constitution says. It explicitly says Congress declares war. It's one of their most important enumerated powers. But for decades now, presidents from both parties have been using these workarounds.
Things like police actions or...
Police actions, counterterrorism authorities, authorized use of military force from 20 years ago. They find these legal justifications to wage war without asking the people's house for permission.
So the Democrats do it, the Republicans do it. It's a trend of the executive branch eating the legislative branch. But then we get to Trump. And the source uses a specific word to describe his role in this. Ramification.
Yes, a ramification. Or a worsening, an acceleration. If the imperial presidency was a slow creep before, the source argues the Trump administration represents, a quantum leap.
It's an escalation of the trend.
It is. It's the difference between bending the norms and just snapping them in half.
And the favorite tool for this escalation, it seems, is the emergency.
The state of emergency. It is the ultimate loophole. It's the skip card in the game of Uno. It's the skeleton key that unlocks powers the president isn't supposed to have.
Okay, so explain how that works mechanically. Because I think, like most people, when I hear state of emergency, I think of hurricanes or earthquakes. I think of FEMA trucks bringing water.
And that is the intended use, yes. That's what it was designed for. But in the context of the imperial presidency, it's a budget hack. It's a constitutional cheat code.
Cheat code. I like that.
Okay, so let's play it out. Let's say you are the president. You want to build a massive border wall. It's your signature promise. You go to Congress, the people who control the budget, and you say, I want billions of dollars for a wall.
And Congress, being Congress, they debate it, they vote.
And they say, no, we aren't giving you that money. We're giving you some money for border security, but not for the wall you want.
In a normal, high-functioning democracy, that should be the end of it, right? The representatives of the people have spoken. The answer is no.
Theoretically, yes. That is the check and balance working perfectly. But in the era of the imperial presidency, the president says, okay, fine. If you won't give it to me, I declare a national emergency at the border.
And what does that declaration actually do? Is it just a speech?
Yeah.
A press conference?
It's a legal trigger. Suddenly, because of that declaration, the president gains access to different pots of money that were off limits before. He can take money that Congress explicitly appropriated for something else, say military housing or disaster relief funds, and move it to the wall project.
So he's overriding the will of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
He's taking money they allocated for soldiers' families and using it for his pet project that they specifically rejected.
Precisely. It's like a magic trick. You wave the emergency wand and the checks and balances, the power of the purse, it just disappears.
It renders the congressional vote meaningless.
It absolutely does. And the source brings up a really smart warning from Rand Paul about this.
Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, a libertarian-leaning Republican.
The very same. And remember, he's a Republican warning his own party about a Republican president's actions. This wasn't a partisan attack. It was an institutional defense.
So what was his argument?
He made the slippery slope argument. He stood up on the Senate floor and said, essentially, if we use an emergency declaration to build a wall today because we can't get the votes, what stops a future Democratic president from declaring a climate emergency tomorrow and banning all gasoline vehicles without a single vote in Congress?
That's a powerful point. It's about precedent. It's not about the wall. It's about the tool.
It's all about the tool. Once you establish that the president can bypass Congress just by saying the word emergency, you have fundamentally changed the nature of the office permanently.
You have. You've handed a loaded weapon to whoever sits in that chair next, regardless of their ideology.
And that is the definition of the imperial presidency. It is power that doesn't rely on consensus or law, but on the whim of the person sitting in the chair.
So that's the high-level constitutional theory. The executive is getting stronger, Congress is getting weaker. But the source moves from the abstract to the very, very concrete in Section 2. And this is where it gets, frankly, a little scary.
Section 2, the enforcers. Because an emperor needs an army.
Right. You can't just decree things from an office. You need someone to go out and make people listen. And the source focuses heavily on one agency, ICE Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
This section is critical, and I think we need to clear up a misconception that the source highlights immediately right from the start.
Which is?
The difference between ICE and the police. I think for a lot of people, especially outside the U.S. or even inside the U.S. who aren't familiar with the system, they just see a badge and a gun and think, police. They think it's all the same bucket.
But the source says very clearly ICE is not the police.
Correct. And the distinction is vital for understanding this power struggle. Police are local or state. They answer to mayors, city councils, governors, local communities. They enforce state and local laws.
And crucially, generally speaking, if the police want to kick down your door and search your house, they need a judicial warrant.
Yes. A judicial warrant implies a judge is involved. Right.
Yeah.
A third party from a separate branch of government.
Someone independent.
Exactly. A judge, part of the judicial branch, has to look at the evidence and say, yes, there is probable cause to enter this home. It's a check on state power. But ICE is a federal agency. They answer directly to the president, and the source highlights that they often operate on administrative warrants.
Okay, let's drill down on that because that sounds like a technical term. What is an administrative warrant?
It does sound technical, but it's actually quite simple and quite disturbing if you care about checks and balances.
Yeah.
An administrative warrant isn't signed by a judge.
So who signed it?
It's essentially a piece of paper signed by a supervisor within the immigration agency itself.
Wait, so let me get this straight. The executive branch writes a note giving the executive branch permission to enter a private building.
Precisely. It's the executive giving itself permission to act. It cuts the judiciary out of the loop entirely, and the source makes a really big deal about the sanctity of the home.
Right.
In American culture and in constitutional law, the home is the castle. It's the temple of individualism. The Fourth Amendment is all about protecting you from unreasonable searches in your home.
A man's home is his castle.
Right. So when you have federal agents entering homes on the authority of a supervisor's signature rather than a judge's impartial review, it represents a massive expansion of executive intrusion. It's the central government reaching directly into the living room, bypassing those local judicial checks we take for granted.
And the source describes the agents themselves in a way that is, well, it's alarming. It doesn't describe them as these elite, highly trained detectives.
No, not at all. The source talks about a rapid expansion, a doubling of operatives in a very short time. And the source argues that because of this rush to boost numbers, the vetting is poor and the operatives are minimally trained.
So you have a massive influx of people with federal authority and guns, but not necessarily the experience or temperament for the job.
And the term the source uses to describe this force is politically motivated militias.
Malicious. That's a loaded word.
It's an incredibly loaded word. It implies they aren't neutral law enforcement serving the public trust. It implies they are soldiers for a specific cause, loyal to the leader's agenda rather than to the letter of the law.
But you can't have a massive private army without paying for it. And the budget numbers in the source, they made my jaw drop.
They are staggering. The source mentions a proposal to take the agency budget from under $10 billion to $85 billion.
$85 billion for one domestic agency.
It's hard to visualize that much money. It's just an abstract number. But the source gives us a comparison that really, really drives it home. It compares this directly to Germany. The country. Germany is one of the largest economies in the world, a G7 nation. a major NATO ally. Their entire annual defense spending, we are talking the German Army, the German Navy, the German Air Force, cyber defense, everything, is around $86 billion.
So the proposal was to create a domestic federal enforcement agency inside the U.S. with the funding power of the entire German military.
Essentially, yes. When you give an agency that kind of money, you aren't just buying paper clips and office chairs. You are buying power. You are buying military-grade equipment. You are buying surveillance tech. You are buying reach into every corner of the country.
And this isn't just a theoretical problem. The source gives us a tragic example of what this looks like when the rubber meets the road. The Minneapolis case.
Yeah.
The killing of a victim referred to as Renee Good.
Yes. The source details this incident as an example of the inefficiency and, frankly, the danger of these forces. You have these minimally trained operatives, flush with cash and power, operating on administrative warrants, engaging with civilians in American cities, and in this case, it resulted in the death of a citizen.
But the source pivots here. It doesn't just stay on the shooting itself, on the tactical details. It moves to the reaction. And this is where that Civil War theme comes roaring back into focus. It talks about how the media covered it, specifically Fox News.
This is a masterclass in polarization, according to the source. Fox News, representing the conservative media ecosystem, didn't focus on the ballistics. They didn't focus on the validity of the warrant or the training of the agents. They focus on the victim's biography.
They highlighted that she was a lesbian divorced poet. Right. That's the exact phrase from the source.
Yes. Lesbian divorced poet. Now ask yourself, what does being a poet have to do with being shot by a federal agent during a raid? What does being divorced have to do with the law?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's completely irrelevant to the legal facts of the case.
Exactly. But in the narrative war, it means everything. The source argues this rhetoric is designed to dehumanize. It signals to the audience, this person is not like you. This person is the other. This person is part of the cultural decay you're worried about.
It's setting up a permission structure.
Yes, that's the perfect term for it. If the person is the other, then maybe it's okay that the government shot them. That is the terrifying logic. It justifies executive force against enemies within.
And it breaks that American totem we talked about at the start.
It shatters it. It says we aren't one people, we are two warring tribes, and the government is just the weapon one tribe gets to use against the other for 4 years.
That is heavy. But it really explains why the political temperature feels so high all the time. It's existential.
It is. It's not about policy anymore.
Okay, so we have established the executive branch is getting huge. It's pumped up on steroids, cash, and emergency powers. But what about the other guys? What about Congress? They are supposed to be the check on this. Section 3, the mechanics of gridlock.
The congressional counterweight. Or, as it often happens, the lack thereof. The source really gets into the nitty-gritty here.
The source introduces this concept of the triplet. I love this term. It sounds like a sports bet or something from a racetrack.
It basically is a high-stakes political bet. The triplet refers to one party controlling 3 things simultaneously: the White House, the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate.
And the source breaks down the math of power here, because getting all 3 is incredibly hard.
It is. And even when you get it, it's not what you think. You have 435 seats in the House. You have 100 seats in the Senate. To control the House, you need 218. It's a simple majority. But the Senate is where legislative dreams go to die.
Because of the 60-vote hurdle. The filibuster.
Exactly. The source explains that a simple majority, 51 senators, usually isn't enough to pass meaningful, controversial legislation because of the filibuster. Any senator can essentially stand up and block a bill unless you get 60 votes to stop them.
Which is almost impossible to get in this polarized environment. I mean, getting 60 people to agree on lunch is hard enough, let alone a massive healthcare or climate bill.
Right. So even if a president has the triplet, even if they technically control the House and have 51 or 52 senators, they can still be paralyzed. They can't pass their big-ticket agenda items.
And the source argues that if a president loses the triplet, if they lose the House or the Senate in a midterm election, they are crippled.
Prematurely crippled. They become a lame duck for the last 2 years of their term.
They might have years left in their term, but their ability to legislate just evaporates.
Completely. And the source gives historical examples of this frustration. Look at Trump. He had the triplet in his first 2 years. He had the House and the Senate. And he still failed to repeal Obamacare, his #1 promise. Why?
John McCain.
John McCain, one senator, a member of his own party, internal opposition. He gave the famous thumbs down on the Senate floor and killed the bill. That shows the fragility of the president's power when the legislature decides to flex its muscles.
And the source mentions Biden, too.
Yes, a similar story. Biden came in with big plans, like his Jobs Act, a massive investment package. But due to internal opposition, the source alludes to the struggle to get every single Democrat in the Senate in line. He was forced to slice his plans down again and again.
So even with the triplet, you're not an emperor. But when the president is blocked, or when the opposition takes control of Congress, how does Congress fight back against this imperial president? The source calls it Congress strikes back.
Their biggest and most fundamental weapon is the power of the purse. We mentioned this earlier. It's their Article I power.
The checkbook.
It's the checkbook. The source cites an instance where the House, controlled by the opposition, stopped subsidy payments that the president wanted to cut or change. They basically went into the budget and said, no, that funding stream stays open.
Right.
It's a direct countermand. If Congress refuses to appropriate the money or stops the payments, the executive theoretically can't act.
Unless they declare an emergency, like we said before.
Unless they declare an emergency. You see how it's a constant game of cat and mouse. Congress locks the door. The president tries to climb through the window.
It really is. What else can Congress do besides control the money?
Another major weapon is the War Powers Resolution. It's their check on the president's commander-in-chief powers. The source highlights a vote regarding potential military action in Venezuela.
Yeah.
The Senate voted to limit the president's ability to wage war there. And what's interesting is the party dynamics of that vote.
Source mentions defectors, right? This wasn't just a party line vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
4 Republicans defected to vote with the Democrats against a Republican president's wishes.
That's significant. It shows that sometimes institutional loyalty. I am a senator, and the Senate has constitutional rights. Trump's party loyalty. I am a Republican and must support my president.
Precisely. It's the legislative branch as an institution saying, hey, wait a minute. Article 1 of the Constitution says we make the laws. We declare war. Back off. It's a flash of that old constitutional struggle working as intended. A brief one, but it's there.
But this struggle isn't just about votes on bills or funding. A lot of it is about information. It's about oversight. And this leads us to Section 4, the clash of doctrines.
This is a fascinating philosophical split. The source argues there are 2 realities, 2 fundamentally different and incompatible ideas about what Congress actually is and what its relationship to the president should be.
Okay, let's break down the 2 sides. What's the Democratic view, according to the source's analysis?
The source describes the Democratic view, or perhaps the traditional oversight view, as believing Congress has an intrinsic right to surveillance and oversight of the executive branch.
What does that mean, intrinsic right?
It means it's not a privilege, it's a core function. They believe they are the board of directors and the president is the CEO. The CEO works for the board. The CEO has to answer to the board. They have a right to see the documents, to interview the staff, to know what the executive is doing with the taxpayers' money and authority.
That seems reasonable. We pay the bills, tell us what you're doing. What is the opposing view?
The source describes the Republican view, or this executive privilege view, as seeing the branches as co-equals who do not answer to each other. In this worldview, the president is not a subordinate. He is an equal.
So not a CEO reporting to a board.
More like 2 kings of neighboring countries. They might negotiate, but one doesn't have the right to demand answers from the other. Therefore, information is a good to be negotiated, not an inherent right of Congress.
So Congress says, give us the documents, it's our right. The president says, make me, or let's make a deal. What do I get in return?
Exactly. It turns oversight into a transaction. And when the opposition takes the House, this clash of doctrines leads to what the source calls the war of subpoenas.
Okay, break down the tactics for us. How does this war look in practice? What are the weapons?
On the congressional side, they launch investigations. They use their subpoena power to compel documents and testimony from officials. If people refuse to show up, they can initiate contempt of Congress procedures. They use the media to try to shame or pressure the executive into compliance.
And the executive. Do they just hand over the documents when they get a subpoena?
Almost never in a high-stakes case. They fight back. They claim executive privilege, which is this idea that the president's private conversations with advisors are protected. They contest the jurisdiction. They argue, you in Congress don't have the authority to ask about this specific national security conversation, or they simply refuse to collaborate. They just ignore the deadlines.
And the result of all this is, what, a standoff?
Lawfare.
I like that term. It sounds like warfare, but with lawyers in expensive suits.
That's exactly what it is. The political battle moves from the floor of Congress, where voters have some influence, to the courtroom, where they have none. Judges become the arbiters of political power. Every subpoena, every claim of privilege ends up in litigation for months or even years.
So it's a way to run out the clock.
Yeah,
By the time a court orders the documents to be turned over, the election is over, and it's a moot point.
precisely. It's a system designed for compromise, struggling to function in an era of total zero-sum political war.
And when the system struggles, when the gears grind to a halt like that, people start looking for ways to break the machine entirely. This is Section 5, the nuclear options.
This is the most dangerous part of the deep dive, the nuclear options. This is where the executive stops trying to work with or even around the system and starts trying to actively dismantle it from the inside.
The source talks about purging the bureaucracy.
Right. You often hear the term deep state thrown around in media.
All the time. Usually as a boogeyman, this shadowy conspiracy.
But the source frames this deep state not as a secret cabal, but as the permanent civil service. The hundreds of thousands of non-political government employees, the experts, the scientists, the administrators who stay in their jobs regardless of who is president.
They're supposed to be the keel of the ship, keeping things steady and running no matter who the captain is.
That's the idea. They represent institutional knowledge and continuity. But the source describes a direct attack on these independent agencies and the civil service itself.
What kind of attack?
It details an effort to fire the heads of independent agencies. People who were legally meant to be immune to presidential whims, specifically to protect their independence from politics.
Like who? What kind of agencies are we talking about?
Think about agencies that are supposed to be nonpartisan, inspectors general, heads of scientific bodies. But it goes further. The source mentions just emptying federal offices, literally leaving positions unstaffed so no work can be done. It talks about a plan to dismantle the Department of Education by firing 50% of the staff.
If you fire half the staff, you don't need to pass a law ending the department through Congress. It just stops working. It's a soft demolition.
Exactly. It's death by starvation. You hollow it out from the inside.
And it's not just education. The source mentions a really critical one. The Federal Reserve.
The Fed, the money people, this is huge for the economy.
It is absolutely critical. The Federal Reserve controls the money supply and interest rates. It is supposed to be fiercely independent so that politicians can't manipulate the economy for short-term election gains. You don't want a president lowering interest rates and printing money just to boost the stock market right before voting day, risking massive inflation later on.
Correct. Its independence is a cornerstone of economic stability. But the source notes the president tried to fire a Federal Reserve governor and even opened an investigation into the chairman, Jerome Powell.
For what reason? A policy disagreement.
Because of a disagreement over interest rates. The president wanted lower rates. The Fed disagreed. The message being sent is crystal clear. Do what helps me politically, or I will come after you and your job. It removes the internal checks and balances within the executive branch itself.
So you purge the people who might say no inside the government. But what about the people outside? What about the voters? The source has a section on weaponizing the elections.
This brings us back to that $85 billion ICE force and the use of federal power. It talks about data.
A data seizure.
Yes. The source mentions a proposal to demand voter data from states' names, addresses, party registration, voting history, and the threat attached to this demand was, hand it over or we will deploy ICE to your state to investigate.
That is essentially holding the states hostage. Give us the lists of all your voters or we send in the federal agents.
It's an intimidation tactic. It suggests that the federal enforcement arm is watching the voting process, which can have a chilling effect. And it pairs with another tactic. Gerrymandering.
The map drawing.
The source highlights a specific push in Texas to create 5 new congressional districts. But not just any districts. The plan was to draw districts specifically designed to isolate and dilute opposition voters. It's the classic strategy of choosing your voters rather than letting voters choose their representatives.
And then there's the ultimate nuclear option, the one the source explicitly names, the Insurrection Act of 1807.
This is a dusty old law, but it's incredibly powerful. This is the statute that allows the president to deploy the U.S. military domestically, to use active duty troops on American soil against American citizens.
Against who? For what purpose?
Ostensibly to quell protests or restore order, but in the context of a disputed election, the source warns it could be used to seize control of election machinery, to nationalize the National Guard and take them out of the governor's control, to literally use the army to stop vote counting or seize ballots.
And the source connects this to the whole narrative of fraud, the lost ballot narrative.
This is a crucial insight in the source material. It points out that the legal claims of widespread fraud lost in every single court case. They had no evidence that stood up to judicial scrutiny. Not one.
So they failed in their goal.
Legally, yes. But the source argues the goal was never really a legal victory. The goal was to build a myth, a political banner to rally the base.
Explain that. Why does the myth matter if you lose in court?
Because if you can convince your supporters that the system is rigged, that the election was stolen, that there are lost ballots out there that prove you really won, then using the Insurrection Act doesn't look like a coup to them.
It looks like justice.
It looks like saving the country. It builds that permission structure we talked about for authoritarianism. You aren't breaking the law, you are restoring the real vote. That is where the danger lies. It's about creating an alternate reality where extreme measures seem justified.
This brings us to the outro. The broken totem. This is a powerful way to end it.
The source uses this beautiful but really tragic metaphor, the American totem. It's the foundational myth that despite all our differences in race, religion, politics, Americans are one people, e pluribus unum. Out of many, one.
But the source argues that totem is fracturing. It's breaking apart.
It is. When you have narratives painting fellow citizens as enemies within, as we saw with the Fox News coverage of Renee Good, when you have a structural war between the president and Congress where compromise is impossible, the shared identity collapses.
The source says the struggle is no longer just about policy.
No, it's not about tax rates or road funding anymore. It's about existence. It's about who belongs, who is a real American, and who is the enemy.
The source has this philosophical line about entropy that really stuck with me. It felt profound.
An uncontested empire collapsing under its own entropy, eating itself.
Eating itself. Wow.
It's the idea that without a major external challenger like the Soviet Union in the Cold War to focus the country's energy outward, the system turns inward. The immense power and energy that used to go outward now just consumes the foundations of the country itself.
So what does this all mean for us? For the learner listening to this, trying to make sense of the news?
It means we need to stop looking at politics as just a horse race. We need to stop focusing on who tweeted what today. We need to look at the structure. We need to understand that the constitutional struggle isn't just history from 1789. It is happening right now, in real time.
It's the subtext of every headline.
It is. Every time a subpoena is ignored, every time an emergency is declared to bypass Congress, every time a federal agent acts without a judicial warrant, that is the struggle in action. That's a crack forming in the foundation.
It really makes you question the durability of the whole system. We assume the Constitution is this immovable wall. But hearing all this, is it a wall? Or is it just a piece of paper that only works if everyone agrees to follow the rules?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? What actually stops an executive from becoming a king? Is it the law? Or is it just a set of norms and traditions? And if the norms are gone, what's left?
A very provocative thought to leave you with. If the SACI rails are based on honor, and honor seems to be in very short supply, you should probably buckle up.
Indeed.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We will catch you on the next one.